Well, let's go to our neighbours now. In Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has made public a report on post-election violence there. Mnangagwa ordered a commission of inquiry chaired by former South African President Motlanthe to investigate the violence during post-election protests in Harare earlier this year. If you remember, at least 6 people were killed and 35 others were injured. Well, to discuss the findings of this report, we're joined this morning by ENCA's Aldrin Sampear. He covered those elections and, of course, the trouble that happened after that as well. Aldrin, good morning. You've had a squiz through this extensive report, but what's your overall impression of this report before we go into the actual detail?
I was actually quite surprised. The report is about 120 pages, if I'm not mistaken. But in those 120 pages, these will include the annexures, which will be a lot of papers, a lot of documents, as well as the executive summary, and then, of course, the report itself. What the report doesn't do, the report doesn't name specifically who are the people who should be investigated. For instance, it says there should be an investigation into the crimes that have been committed. But it doesn't say who exactly has committed the crimes. There's an issue around, for instance, where the report indicates that of the 6 people, 4 were shot from the back. And there's one person that the report believes was shot by the police. It's quite strange that you'd have such a finding when the people of Zimbabwe, I believe, were actually looking for answers, that this commission of inquiry will give them answers about who were the people who pulled the trigger, and whether these people will be held accountable. But we don't have that as yet.
Okay, so let's talk about those findings in a bit more detail. It says here the report blames the country's security forces for fatally shooting 6 people and injuring 35. And like you say, they don't say who, though. They don't
who those
say
people are, yeah.
Exactly.
And the thing about it is that there were ballistics reports as well. And I find it quite strange that the commission didn't go as far as finding out, for instance, that the bullets that were lodged in some of these victims or some of the people who have passed on, couldn't they link them to any specific officer, any specific soldier who was deployed on that particular day? I find that such a strange thing for me. The other thing is what the report also indicates, as I said earlier on, that at least 4 people were shot from the back. Who are the people who are pulling the trigger at the time? And I think that's where the report really falls short in terms of giving the people of Zimbabwe answers in terms of what has happened. Another strange thing for me in the report is in terms of how the deployment of the soldiers on the day. So the minister, rather the police commissioner, sends a note to the Minister of Home Affairs, Minister Mpofu, to say, we are struggling as the police to quell the tensions here in the CBD. Can you please ask for the military to come in for assistance? Mr. Mpofu then writes to the Vice President of the country, who's also the Minister of Defense, who then says, okay, I will then speak to President Emmerson Mnangagwa so that the soldiers are deployed. Then all of a sudden, we only get a response from the Vice President saying that the President has agreed that the army must be deployed. But there's no documentation to that effect, that indeed the President did say that the army must be deployed. And that's why I believe that Nelson Chamisa, the leader of the MDC Alliance, had a good point in arguing that the President, at least, President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his Vice President, should be called in front of the Commission to explain exactly how they arrived at the decision to have the army deployed.
So before we go to the recommendations, Aldrin, do we know who was questioned, what the actual process was for this commission to come to these conclusions? Who was questioned, who was asked?
There was oral evidence that was led, and these included people who were victims of people who were injured, as well as some of the bereaved families. And quite interestingly, though, and this just showed how things were manipulated. This is just one incident, is where at least I think 2 people were killed, and the post-mortem report said that they were killed by stab wounds. But then the families protested and said that that's not the truth. We know, as a matter of fact, that these people were shot and killed. And only after that, then, were the post-mortem reports then changed. So those are some of the testimonies that the Commission has heard. As well, of course, as we indicated, Nelson Chamisa, the leader of the MDC, who has been accused of inciting violence, as well as Tendai Biti. We also had the Human Rights Commission of Zimbabwe also testifying, and some footage that they received from various media houses. And quite weird for me, though, is that The Commission makes reference to footage that they have watched from ENCA, but I don't remember us being called. We're not even on the list of the 48 people
to
who
contextualize
exactly of the organizations that were invited to come and testify or give some sort of evidence in front of the Commission.
That is strange. That definitely is strange. That's the recommendations, the main ones for you, and let's just go through those. And do they make sense to you?
The recommendations, first of all, is compensation for the victims, as well as those who had loved ones who have passed on, but that will be determined by the government. That has been left up to the government. As the Commission has indicated earlier on, as I said earlier on as well, there is the call for an investigation into people who have committed crimes. The Commission does say that because they don't have the report from the police in terms of the investigations of which crimes were committed by who, that's one of the limitations that the Commission has faced. And those probably some of the what
does it say about the actual election process? Because we know that a lot of this unhappiness was about delays, was about election results trickling in. Were they the real results? Weren't they people? So there was lots of suspicion about how the election.
And what the Commission does say is because the Constitution allows for the election results to be released 24 hours after the election, is what the Constitution also says that it can be released within 5 days. The Commission's report says that that's a bit too long because you have that long period and you have that lull. That's where people then come in. This is when the political leaders then come in and may mislead and give misinformation with regards to the results. And that's exactly what happened this time around because of the delay in the announcement of the results. But what we shouldn't forget, I believe, is that even if the results were announced immediately, even on the 30th of July, I still believe that you would have seen the protest that you've seen in the CBD of Harare because there was the tension, and the report, the Commission is right that even before the elections there were calls from the MDC alliance leaders, and they've made it clear that the MDC will not accept anything but a victory.
Okay, thanks very much, Aldrin Simpe. It seems that this report has left us with more questions than answers. Thanks for your time.